Holy Gospel according to Luke. Now he was teaching in one of the synagogues on the Sabbath, and just then there appeared a woman with a spirit that had crippled her for 18 years. She was bent over and was quite unable to stand up straight. When Jesus saw her, he called her over and said, "Woman, you are set free from your ailment." When he laid his hands on her, immediately she stood up straight and began praising God. But the leader of the synagogue, indignant because Jesus had cured on the Sabbath, kept saying to the crowd, "There are 6 days on which work ought to be done. Come on those days and be cured, and not on the Sabbath day." But the Lord answered him, said, "You hypocrites, does not each of you on the Sabbath untie his ox or his donkey from the manger and lead it to water? And ought not this woman, a daughter of Abraham, whom Satan bound for 18 long years, be set free from this bondage on the Sabbath day?" When he said this, all his opponents were put to shame. The entire crowd was rejoicing at all the wonderful things being done by him. The gospel of the Lord. Well, the event takes place in a synagogue on the Sabbath, as we read. The Sabbath is a sacred time. It was a time for rest and worship in the Hebrew tradition. Healing on the Sabbath was controversial because it was seen by some as a violation of the law of Moses. This woman is described as having been crippled for 18 years. She's probably been marginalized both physically and socially. Jesus' act of healing her publicly challenges the norms of exclusion and ritual purity. The synagogue leader's objection reflects really a broader tension between Jesus and the religious authorities. His ministry often reinterprets the law in favor of compassion over legalism. Okay, we look at the structure of this. Verses 10 through 13, Jesus teaches and heals. Verses 14 through 16 is the conflict with the synagogue leader. And the final verse, 17, is the reaction of the crowd and the resolution to all of this. There's some great terms that are used in here. In verse 16, Jesus refers to this woman as a daughter of Abraham. It's a rare phrase. We don't hear that. He's affirming the woman's dignity and her inclusion in the covenant. There she was, bent over for 18 years, not just physically, but socially, spiritually, existentially. Her body told the story of a world that had forgotten her. And yet, on the Sabbath, in the synagogue, Jesus sees her. The word set free is also used. Pardon me. And it echoes themes that we've been talking about the last couple of weeks about liberation, both physical liberation and spiritual liberation. Then there's a contrast. One of my professors, Daniel Pott, was big on structuralism, it's called, and he said, look at the structure of, especially in the Gospels. And he says, you in this case, you see what he called or what is called in art a diptych, which is two panels that are usually hinged together, and there'll be a painting on one side and a painting on the other. In the Middle Ages, there was a triptych where there was three panels. I think Hieronymus Bosch, made that famous too. But anyway, this diptych of being set free, physical and spiritual, but then the contrast of this leader's, the synagogue leader's legalistic stance over and against Jesus' liberating stance and his liberating action. Of course, it highlights the tension between institutional religion and prophetic compassion. Sure, the Sabbath was meant to be a day of rest, of remembering God's liberation from Egypt. But over time, it had become a day of restriction, gatekeeping, as they say, a day of control. You can't do this. It's supposed to symbolize freedom, but you can't do this or that. So the synagogue leader rebukes Jesus. There are 6 days to heal. Come back then. But Jesus refuses to compartmentalize compassion. He reclaims the Sabbath as a time of freedom. Should not this daughter of Abraham, whom Satan has bound for 18 long years, shouldn't she be set free on the Sabbath day? Jesus doesn't just heal her body, he restores her identity, calling her a daughter of Abraham. What a magnificent phrase to use. A title of covenant, title of dignity, title of belonging. Yeah, that's her. Jesus' healing isn't just physical. It's a symbolic act of, again, the word liberation from a systemic oppression. The woman's restoration challenges these patriarchal and purity-based exclusions. The woman is unnamed, but she's a central character here. Her transformation from bent over to upright mirrors a reclaiming of her own voice, of her own agency, especially as she praises God publicly. Now, while Jesus performs the miracle, the woman praises only God, which is kind of showing us a theological humility in Jesus' role as a mediator rather than a self-aggrandizer. As I've said before, Jesus didn't come for us to worship him. Jesus came to show us how to be like him. That wonderful passage in chapter 10 of Dietrich Bonhoeffer's book, Discipleship, says, he became like us so that we could become like him. Not to come and say, look at me, look at me. Jesus is always pointing to the Creator. We can look at Luke and see that Luke often emphasizes Jesus' own concern for the marginalized. Luke, more than anybody, mentions women and especially widows, mentions children, orphans. And this passage here fits in very nicely with Luke's broader narrative of social reversal, where indeed the last become first. You gotta love that. Then in verse 17, the last verse, with the crowd rejoicing, it kind of contrasts the leader's indignation, reinforcing Luke's theme of communal affirmation of divine justice. Now, some of the early church theologians, they like to approach this passage and many others with a spiritual and sometimes allegorical lens. That is to say, allegorical meaning it represents something else. Origen for example, said that the bent over woman was a symbol of the soul that's weighed down by sin, and that Christ is the one who straightens us up, straightens the soul through divine teaching and healing. Okay. Origen, sorry, I just said him. Augustine interpreted the healing as a metaphor for the resurrection and the restoration of humanity through grace. Okay. The Sabbath controversy for Augustine underscored the priority of mercy over ritual. John Chrysostom, the great saint of the Eastern Orthodox Church, emphasized the hypocrisy of the synagogue leader. And he praises Jesus for exposing legalism and elevating compassion. He also talked about the woman's praise as a model for gratitude and faith. The act of Jesus, the act of healing, really is a direct challenge to oppressive systems, whether religious or social or spiritual, political. The woman's bondage is not just physical bondage, but it's symbolic of this systemic marginalization. Then Jesus goes on to reclaim the Sabbath as a day of freedom, not a day of restriction. His comparison to untying animals in verse 15 is a bit of a rabbinic argument that elevates human dignity over ritual precision. The woman, though unmarried, as I said, is a central figure. She's the central figure of transformation. Her public praise disrupts the patriarchal silence and affirms her full inclusion in the covenantal community. Again, calling her the daughter of Abraham is radical. And it affirms her spiritual lineage and runs countercurrent to this gendered exclusion. Jesus' healing word is mighty to heal. And this authority, which verse 15 uses the word kyrios, the lordship of Jesus, supersedes all this institutional gatekeeping. We should see this passage as a call to always choose divine mercy in the face of social discrimination. The synagogue's leader reflects what really can only be described as institutional fear of losing control, losing relevance, losing offerings. We have to be warned that religious systems can perpetuate bondage when they prioritize order over liberation and freedom. The passage here is a wonderful crucible for letting our imaginations take off theologically. Here in this passage, tradition meets transformation. Jesus honors the Sabbath by fulfilling its deepest purpose, which was restoration. Here, the law meets liberation. This rabbinic logic is used not to exclude, but to include. Jesus is firmly in the camp and in the style of the rabbis. Silence meets song. The woman's praise becomes a communal celebration, a liturgy of liberation. It's not just a healing story, it's a liberation story. The woman is a symbol of all who are bent under the weight of exclusion because of gender, because of race, because of economics, because of church. And Jesus' act of liberation and healing is a protest against all those systems that prioritize order over mercy. And the crowd rejoices, not because the rules were followed, but because God showed up. This is the kind of Sabbath that the prophets dreamed of. Isaiah 58. Is not this the fast I chose to loose the bonds of injustice? Actually, I think it was choose, not chose. Is this not the fast I choose to loose the bonds of injustice? For the church, it means refusing to let doctrine, dogma, eclipse dignity. Not our dignity, everyone else's. For our community, it means seeing the bent over ones and calling them forward. Jesus sees her and calls to her. For you and me, it means trusting that healing is not a disruption, it's the very heart of holiness. So, what does this story tell us? Let us reclaim the Sabbath. Let us interrupt the silence. And let us all stand up straight. Thanks be to God.